Hi, Robin Gamble from the Scholar Warrior Podcast, the scholarwarriorpodcast.com. And really excited tonight because after a break of quite a few months, the podcast is up and rolling again. And we've got some amazing guests lined up. And tonight I am going to train with the Sussex Sword Academy over in Brighton. So they're part of the HEMA movement, the Historical European Martial Arts group. There's a lot of practitioners sparring with swords, ancient European swords and sword techniques. So I'm really excited to go and check these guys out and pick up some weapons and see what it's about. It's the first time I've ever tried this, so I'm excited and we'll see how it goes. Hi guys, so it's the day after I visited the Sussex Sword Academy and I have to say I'm still on a bit of a high. There's such a variety of weapons, a huge variety of people training, from male, female, young, slightly older. So a real variety, really cool. The expertise on hand was amazing. I was very inspired by the instructors there. And also I think they've done an amazing job to create a really warm environment. It's not intimidating, which you could imagine a load of people throwing swords around a room would be a little bit scary, but they really have created a very good learning for environment. So that was very inspirational, and I recommend, if you're interested in historical European martial arts, go and check these guys out. You can Google them, Sussex Sword Academy. It's very easy to find. So there's so many takeaways from this, but if I just have to quickly summarize, say 3, I would say regardless of the style of martial art that you practice, there is a lot of benefit for having a look at these historical European weapons. I think whatever style you practice, there's going to be crossovers. There's going to be crossovers and skill transference. The other thing I wanted to mention was that these guys are real scholar warriors. They are really interested in the practical application of their art, but they're also really interested in the theory and the tactics and the strategy and how to apply it. Really knowledgeable guys, very inspiring. And the last thing I wanted to say was it is tremendous fun, man. It is so much fun to put on a mask and pick up a sword and try to stab someone. I mean, okay, I'm making light of it. It's just a lot of fun. You got to try it. You got to try it. So tomorrow I'm going to meet and speak with one of the founding members of this club, Duncan, and we're going to have a sit down and a really good chat about what he does. So I'm really excited about that as well. I hope you guys are looking forward to it. So check it out. It will be along soon. So this evening I am with Duncan Fats, the president of the Sussex Sword Academy. He's also the senior instructor and founding member. And I'm going to give you a bit of his bio now so you can understand his background. And then we're going to jump into some really interesting, in-depth questions about his art. So Duncan's first experience with fencing was at the age of 15, when he undertook intensive private tuition in sports épée, that's correct, yeah. But his first involvement with European martial arts wasn't until 1993, when he began medieval armoured tournament fighting and was also taught by members of the serving military. He's a founding member of the SSA, which that was founded in 1997, and he's accredited as an instructor of European martial arts. That happened in 2001, and he's taught extensively throughout the UK, on the continent, and also the United States of America. He's given talks and demonstrations at venues including Leeds Armories, the Wallace Collection, the National Army Museum, and has appeared on stage, on television and in film on such productions as King Arthur and Elizabeth, the Golden Age. Now, having attended one of the Academy's classes and been guided through the basic movements with Duncan, I can attest to his masterful skills and his incredible in-depth knowledge, and also his intense passion for what he teaches. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome you, Duncan, to the Scholar Warrior podcast.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. So we're going to start finding out a little bit about your journey into historical European martial arts and how that took place. So we heard in your bio that you undertook the épée at 15. So what was your exposure to martial arts before that age of 15? What can you remember?
There wasn't much, to be honest. I mean, so it was the seeing films, seeing all these swashbuckling films, thinking that is great. Going to one or two reenactments where you saw people in armour and these adults, you're a child, and going, how do you do that? That is amazing. Right. And you must be a different sort of person somehow. So nothing before that much. I knew about things like judo and karate, and I did sort of think about it, but there weren't many possibilities for that around where I was at the time. Also, I mean, I suffered from asthma quite badly from the age of about 2, so that only started to really ease up by the time I was getting into my teens. Before that, I'd sort of been a sickly boy, as we say. So also, I wasn't too much into team games. I was into athletics in a big way, but the team thing, it was, you were relying on results from too many other people, and it was a thing of sort of self-discipline. So essentially what happened was I was looking into sort of, you know, getting my body better, and through a contact of my father's, there was an advert for a bull workout, one of these things that you so I went to pick that up and found out the woman I was picking it up from, who was selling it, her partner, he was a fencing teacher and master, and actually very good. He'd sort of been considered for the Olympics.
Wow.
So I was just full of questions, and my parents seen this, went, are you interested? Desperately for me to do something. I went, yeah. So I went and trained, and it was great. I did it I did it lots. I did it sort of several days a week over a period of months and whatever. And
so was this kind of in a little gym at his place? Or
yeah, well, we went outside actually where he was and did it in the gardens, in his garden, and did it then. Because as a favour to the family almost, he gave me intense tuition, and cool. Just one-on-one. Right. And then he saw that I was coming on, and eventually said, well, you know, it's a bit of a distance, but do you want to come with me to one of the cells and that? And I think it was almost in a bit of a way he wanted to show me off, but I went there and I thought, I'm not too sure it's for me. I enjoyed it but the huge sort of numbers of people, and even then I could see how the almost rigours and restrictions of the rules of it weren't really the way I wanted to fence. It wasn't the ideal I had as a child of
Right.
fencing in a way. But it taught me a heck of a lot.
So you were sort of in the beginning going towards the sporting direction, but you'd seen something else, presumably in films, which was you felt was how it should be.
Well, I felt that was more, yes. I mean, you work on a piece, for example, in sports fencing, and it wasn't quite as I knew. You know, why can't I move around? You know.
Okay, well,
and
so
in
pieces backwards and forwards.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And with I'm fencing with my master at the time in the garden or whatever. Then he did enable us to go offline and stuff like that, but he was saying that's not the true way, and kept bringing me back. And so I sort of got something from that. But then that was around, as I say, about the age of 15, when I was also doing classical guitar and finding out about girls and all sorts of stuff. And so and exams came up, so it took a bypass then.
So how did that merge into the European martial arts? And again, you mentioned Asian martial arts were around. The fencing kind of fell out of favour for a while, but then you went back into European martial arts. Why not go into kendo or judo or what would have been around a little bit more accessible? Or what I picture would have been more accessible at that time?
Because it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. It was very fashionable almost to do that, but also I was too busy in a sense doing other things. The sort of the turnaround really came when, to be honest, some friends and I, we went paintballing, and talking to one of my friends who was American, I said that was great fun, but not as much fun as when I was in America and there's 1,000 people in full armour going for each other. And we just went, what? That sounds impressive. And he said, yeah, and they do it over here as well, not on such a scale. So we were sort of hooked by that time, and by this time, sort of, you know. So we said, can you introduce us to that? You know, and we did. So this was the Society for Creative Anachronisms, which was abbreviated to the SCA. And went and did that, and within that, we were quite lucky. The sort of the group that we were associated with, a lot of them came from an American Air Force base.
Okay.
And so we were training with them, and we learned through the School of Hard Knocks,
right,
essentially.
So just to paint a clearer picture, you're talking about putting on full medieval style armour and attacking each other.
Yes, with rattan.
Uh-huh.
So rattan, I mean, in tournaments they used, medieval tournaments, they used whalebone and they used wood. So there was some authenticity to this.
Right.
Rather than attacking each other with steel. But even so, you know, we ended up with dents in our armour. It was full armour and it weighed 50 pounds, and it always seemed to be doing tournaments in the baking hot heat, which was... But these chaps were really good, and we went through the whole process, really, I think that everybody goes through, which is, first of all, we did the what. What do I have to do to avoid being hit? And then how do I hit the other person? So we went through that and we learnt something of that. And this was sort of really around as well, sort of the burgeoning time of the internet, when it was just sort of coming into play.
Right.
And through that, we found that there were actually online treaties.
Okay.
From masters, from history, Renaissance time, they were coming on. And that gave us a guide to look at how things would actually have been done. So you can adapt to, you know, there's a series of opponents in front of you, how you're going to get through their defences with shield, sword, axe, whatever. And I say one of the most impressive things I saw from these chaps, on one of the initial encounters, was us. We formed a group of 7, and we were going to train with these chaps, and this set up what was like a bridge battle. And my friend, who was quite a heavy chap, in full armour, suddenly shouted, "Charge!" And he ran through us, went forward, met these guys who had sort of like a pike, and I just saw him lifted up into the air in full armour and thrown back past us, you know, and it was like, whoa.
So he landed. What did he land on? On a pike?
He landed on a pike, somebody with their using, you know, full technique, just and lifted him.
Oh my God.
And it was like, whoa. Thank goodness it wasn't steel. Thinking that's impressive.
Yeah.
So we were learning things through them, but also we wanted to go on to more of the when and the why. And the treatise sort of showed that to us. Also, we were coming up against treaties of rapier, and that got us really quite interested. So then we went off and started practicing that, what was known as light weapons within the SCA, and still weren't getting quite what we wanted. We wanted to study. So then we started and set up our own group, and then I chose myself through looking on the internet and finding out there were other mad groups around like us doing this.
Right. And this was over 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so this was a form that really appealed to us as a group. There's sort of the 7 of us that were really there. We did bring on more people as well. But essentially we set ourselves up as a study group at that point, and looking at these treaties and looking for links to anybody that could help us with this.
Right. And so that is the beginning of the academy that you set up in the Brighton area?
Yes. To begin with, it was called the Sussex Rapier School,
right.
Because it was purely focused on rapier.
And so this was the express kind of idea of really diving into these rather old texts and rediscovering this art.
Yes.
For the sake, for the pure love of it.
Yes, for the pure love of it, and to find out what sort of secrets they held,
right.
and how they could influence and help dictate the way we fenced. So really, for somebody to say, are we doing this right? And are we doing it the way that it would have been done?
And so you got this group, you were then looking for people to say, this is the right way. And that's the right
In a way, yes, and that was almost the next step. So we started making links with other groups, and we found people who were the British Federation of Historical Swordplay, for example, which had been set up, I think, 2 years before. We went to their second meeting. So that was based up in Scotland, run by the Dawn Duelist Group, and that was the first group I got in touch with. And as I think I mentioned to you earlier in the when you came to see us, there weren't many weapons around at that time that were of the right quality for us to use, at least within the sort of price range, etc. So we were using, initially, Schläger blades, which are used in the German Mensur, and those are the ones where you're fairly static but performing cuts, but the steel was of excellent quality. It wasn't quite the right weight, wasn't quite the right balance, and we knew that, but it enabled us to start practice.
You had to make do with what was available.
Had, yeah.
So that is very interesting. How you kind of rediscovered this, this age-old stuff that had been lost.
But then, indeed, and then our search extended further, and through this British Federation and links there, we found there were international links and foreign links, specifically with one Andrea Lupo Sinclair, who was in Italy, who had been taught by a master, who'd been taught by a master. And so we went over to one of their first workshops and did stuff with that.
So there we're talking about sort of an unbroken lineage.
Fairly unbroken.
Unbroken.
Yeah.
I see.
Back to the original sort of techniques of that time.
And so, so that was your journey, effectively, into this art. So I'd like to now go into your art. Let's dissect what's really going on in the academy and what you're teaching there. So could you give us an overview of what's covered in the academy and a little bit of a background of the origin of those things, because there's quite a variety of things that's going on in that academy. I was quite blown away by how many weapons and things are going on.
So there is, but they're all tied into the same principles, and the same principles apply to any fence, and those principles are measure, placement, timing, and judgment. And we first started off solely concentrating on rapier, and that enabled us to get an appreciation and understanding of how that worked. And then now the next weapon that we introduced was broadsword, and that was through an interest of Lyle Drummond, who joined us later on, and trained with us in rapier, but he got fascinated through, again, almost like his heritage of the use of the Scottish broadsword. And there were, again, then texts coming out about that. They weren't so well documented, maybe, as the rapier, but they were there. And also there was burgeoning people who were also looking at that as well. So it was his private study that then went off to use the principles and the techniques that we learned in rapier and apply it to another weapon form, and then look back at the treaties and the old texts or whatever to see how that would be applied. So that was then, okay, you go and do that, we'll see how it goes, we'll support you. And we were still the Sussex Rapier School.
Right.
But then as that developed, and felt comfortable with it, and it was working, and people took an interest in it, that grew. Then we realised that there was an interest in, there's always been an interest in longsword.
Right.
Again, applying the similar sort of techniques to that. Andrew Feast, who's one of the original founders with me, he decided to take that on, and I helped him in the early stages with that as well, in developing a longsword system.
Right.
And then recently, 2 years ago I think, Andrew retired, and that mantle got passed over to Lyle to take on, so he's teaching that. And that's, so again, it's a bit of a mixture, but it's essentially Italian longsword. There's a national flavour to every weapon form that you take on,
Right.
as I think I spoke about at the time. But even Italian longsword is essentially influenced by German longsword, so you can apply it. And when you become competent and understanding, you can see where those slight differences lie in terms of timing, in terms of gaining measure, those sorts of things. So Lyle took that on, and essentially that works quite well, because Highland broadsword is quite a circular, moving in, moving out discipline, and it's pretty much the same with longsword.
Right.
Obviously the same thing happens with rapier, but you tend to be in more of an arc than a complete circle. And then from that, again through an interest in one of our members, then we moved on to small sword as well.
Right.
And then the small sword grew. And so in a sense it's a bit of a, we encourage, it's part of our, now it's part of our grading system almost, that we want you to look and find out something that interests you once you've got up to a certain standard.
So does that mean that someone should have a look at all of the weapons, and they should progress through all of them, or they try?
No, we're not going to be as didactic as that. We find that it helps that our best fencers, by all means, are those who have tried different weapon forms, and they will come to the one that they love.
Right.
And the one that they found that they are have the most simpatico with. But it's something we encourage, and we'll say go and find something you don't have to, but if you've got a particular interest, go and look at it. And it's not just go off and do it by yourself.
Yeah.
We will test you,
Right.
and we will see that it works.
Yeah.
And it does, to some extent, have to relate to an historic method.
Right.
You know, it's not just something they made up like lightsaber, for instance.
Okay. So there's a couple of questions that came up there in my mind as you were talking. So in summary, rapier, broadsword, longsword, small sword?
Small sword or dueling sword, it's
Dueling
also
sword,
called.
right. Rapier, Italian
Yeah.
influence.
Mm-hmm.
Broadsword, Italian.
No, broadsword is Scottish, Irish, Highland, yes. So.
Okay, right. I'm glad I didn't say that in front of Lyle. And then longsword.
Longsword, mixture between German and Italian.
Italian.
Most people practice the German, but we've definitely got strong Italian influences in our system.
And the small sword,
It's French.
French. The other question that came up as you were talking is, when you see someone, do you get an instinct for what would suit them? I mean, like long and lanky is rapier, or short and stocky is broadsword. Do you feel like that when you see them?
There's another friend and master who said that when they go to his school, he asks them to hit him, or try and hit him.
Right.
And if they go for a scything round or a slap or something, he goes, well, you're more for a circular system, you should try that, or you should try
Right.
pole arms or something. If it's more straight, then you're going for more of that. So yes, you can look at people and you can judge, but the great thing about it is so often you're surprised.
Right.
And basically what we say is do what you want to do. There's no point trying to pigeonhole you into something, because what we are in a sense trying to do is to instill a love and appreciation of the art. And so do what you love, and if you enjoy doing something, you're going to learn. So do that. But by all means, and we say to people when you first come in, why don't you're not sure, try a few of the weapon forms. But after a little bit, and we can sort of judge when, you've got to choose one and settle down.
Okay.
Because otherwise you can become slightly contradictory to each other or just confusing.
Right.
So you settle down and practice at one, and practice at that for at least a good year, and then maybe you can move on to something else. And because, to be honest, we can all teach each other's weapons to a certain degree, you know. But going and learning under a different instructor will give you just a different viewpoint of potentially the same thing. Because so often in all these systems, all we're talking about is how to use measure, how to use time, and how to use judgment, and how to use placement.
Right. Yes, I found it very enlightening to go through rapier with yourself. I felt it felt technical and precise, and then to move over to the broadsword, and it wasn't what I expected at all, but it was a completely different flavour, absolutely different flavour. Yeah, very, very interesting. So as you're primarily, you love the rapier, that's what I'm going to focus these following questions on. So when, where, why was it developed, and who used it?
Oh, wow, okay.
Just to narrow it down.
The rapier in a sense didn't exist because what it was known as in Italy was a spada latte. It was a side sword, okay, and so it existed as it could be used on the battlefield and it could be used in self-defense. So technology came along, and another sort of interpretation of the word rapier is sword of the robes, as in a sword for civilian use to be worn with your robes.
Right.
And it was highly effective at that. And the blades, because of the technology, began to be able to be longer and thinner and lighter as well. And as the weapon changed, so did the form in which it was used. So, you're talking from the 1500s through the 1600s, and there were different, again, flavours. So the Italians were very good at it, the Spanish were very good at it, and as I said, there was a slight mix between the different regions of Italy as to the influence they took from Spain, etc. And it came over here. And it came over here as a... Castiglione wrote his book of the courtier, and that was saying that in order to be an accomplished gentleman, you should be accomplished in dance, you should be accomplished in verse, and you should be accomplished in the sword. And this was a great thing around that period, the Elizabethan period, of sort of coming together with the idea of science and art, and this concept of being the rounded individual. And around that period as well, Castiglione coined a phrase, was this idea of sprezzatura. And sprezzatura was to be so practiced at a thing, it wasn't that you did it with looking with apparent ease. It's not that you're lazy about it or whatever, but you are so practiced at it, so accomplished, that you can do it with nonchalance. There's a bit more to it than that, but this was a concept that sort of went around. And it was also a time, there were wars going on, but there was a time when the nobility had potential time on their hands to study. And this goes back to a lot of the martial arts. If you're thinking you're going back further in time to the monks, they were people who were defending themselves, but also they had education and they had the time to actually practice. Poor soldiers or whatever, they had to learn on the hoof and would learn a certain number of movements in order to survive on the battlefield, and would get their own little tricks of their own. And then people were trained for battle. There was a time when fencing masters were outlawed in England because it seemed to be sort of the schools for assassins and those sorts of things, and it got on a slightly dodgy footing. But licenses were also handed out for accomplished fencing masters, and people would go along to a fencing master and say, "I've got a duel. Can you teach me something that will allow me to kill this other person?"
Right.
So
I've got a week.
Exactly. So it occurred within that period. If you look at Shakespeare, especially Romeo and Juliet, for example, you get this great passage in there about Tybalt, and say, that he's a very butcher of a silk button, and that he knows his passado, he knows his... So he is using the terms of Italian rapier at that point. And there is a suspicion, at least, that Shakespeare was trained in Italian rapier. Okay. But at the same time, so just sorry going off here, but there was a great rivalry between the English schools and the Italian schools at that time. Italian schools seemed to be fashionable. They got great salves to themselves. The English schools, who were more of the cut and thrust rather than the Italian rapier, were being sort of shunned by the nobility as such, and losing out. So there were great fights between the two schools, people offering each other out, and there were a few deaths along the way. So this was also a thing that came up in Shakespeare's plays, of this rivalry between the English and the Italian schools. So it's a thing of fashion, as is so often, and also a thing of necessity, almost, of defending themselves.
And you mentioned some of the language, that came up in Shakespeare, and when we were, being guided through some of the basics with yourself, so many of these phrases came up, which apparently are now in, common speech, and they have their roots from they have their roots in fencing, apparently.
So many do. Sword and buckler, obviously. That was people used to wear a buckler, which is a small shield by the side, and also they had their sword by the side, and presumably it made a swashing noise when they walked or swaggered. And they were sort of the equivalent of the lager lads of the Elizabethan period.
They carried a sword, great
they carried
news.
Around, yeah, but everybody did, and lots of people did. It was this sort of, so you had to know how to defend yourselves. Other things, the way that you do up your shirt as a man, so that way so you can keep your sword hand free the way we shake hands. As I said, one of the other things is, getting the measure of somebody. That was a real sort of, it's not for certain that it comes exactly from them, but it takes it all into total account of this. When you were going into combat with somebody, you gain a measure of them in terms of their athleticism, their aggression, their reach, and their ability to offend you, in a sense, and your ability to offend them. So you gain a measure. So you'd be foolish if you ran straight into a fencing match or a duel with somebody without having a few circumspect passes to try and ascertain what they were like as a person.
Getting the measure of the man.
Getting the measure of the man.
And it could literally cost you your life if you didn't do that.
Exactly.
It's really fascinating to think of times like that. As people would spill out of a pub and they'd have weapons on them. It's a totally different level of threat.
Well, Shakespeare said that there were not many boys over the age of 12 who didn't have a knife in their belts. So that sort of, which was a utilitarian tool as well, but be careful.
So I found a really, really good quote from yourself where you likened the rapier, it's the sword equivalent of a sniper's rifle, and in the right hands it's long range, highly accurate, unforgiving, a scientific instrument that has to be applied with reason and art.
Yes.
That's a really charged statement, which I think we can unpack and probably learn quite a lot from. So why is it considered long range? I mean, how far can it travel in what time?
Well, it can travel very fast in a short time. It is a long weapon. Some of the weapons actually, if you go to some of the museums and you look, they got almost overly long. They would almost bend at the end, so they become slightly useless from that point of view. But it is a long-range weapon from the point of view that in our system, you can hold back the vita, which is holding back the spirit of yourself, which you say, equates to the waist essentially. But from there, you can be in a contracted form and then do a long lunge out. And so you've got the length of the sword, which some people say should come up to your armpit. So you're travelling 12 feet. Some people said that I can do a lunge further than anybody else, and they'd show techniques for that. And there are even little tricks you can do. You can almost let go of the hilt and let it travel out a little bit. But it's a dangerous thing to do. But it is long range. As long as you've got the right placement and the right judgment and the right time, it can work. Right. So it's a long range weapon compared to maybe the broadsword, where you're having to get in closer to get a cut. Right. In order, yes, you can still do it with the tip, but you've got to get a good slicing action on that. So even if you're cutting with a rapier, you've got to get in closer to do that. And you get into close play, but it can also kill from out there, and it will go straight through your body.
So we're talking over 3 meters, actually.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. So from nothing to 3 meters.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it's going to kill you if it goes.
They said that a blade going 3 fingers into your body would kill you anyway, eventually at least.
3 fingers deep.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So it would hit a vital organ, you would bleed to death eventually or whatever. So yes.
And that was the idea, and it's considered highly accurate.
In the right hands.
Right. Yeah. I can attest to that actually.
Yeah.
Definitely. Not particularly accurate when I've got it.
But with all weapons, these sort of things do depend, but it's a highly, because what you are looking for, especially as I say, we do other forms in terms of, say, rapier and dagger.
Right.
And you create this concept of a cone around you. So both in attack and in defence. But when, say, you've got a sword and dagger there, you are looking for the tiniest gap. And you've got to go for it in a split instant. So it's a thrusting weapon, essentially. So you're waiting for them to open up, and you are going for that amount of space between 2 weapons at full tilt. So that is accurate. So we do accuracy training as well.
Unforgiving.
It's unforgiving to both the person it hits and to you as the practitioner.
Yeah.
You get it wrong and it won't work. One of the things I was saying is that footwork. Everything is everything comes from your feet upwards, and sometimes I liken it to a gun position, which is going like that to say fire at a plane. Your feet have got to be pointed in the right direction to launch that rapier. If that's wrong, if your feet are in the wrong position, if you miss your timing, you will fail. And you will not only miss your target, but you could potentially be killed. So it's the technicality of it, so that it's not sort of like, I can maybe get something back out of this if I mess up. You can, potentially, again with experience, but to do it properly...
Yeah, and you've got to be quite committed.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's I can see that.
But as well, I said it's like, some people say use the term like a game of chess. It's not like a game of chess, but in a sense it is, because quite often you were trying to think several moves ahead. You're not sure what the other person is doing or going to do. And this is why, again, if you want to know why it's an art, it's like the art of conversation, because you will say something and you're not sure what's going to come back, but you're going to have to react to it, and you're going to have to react in a way that doesn't upset your own balance, and it potentially produces an answer to it and another question. So we're almost having an art now, and that's what rapier fencing is like. It's this conversation, and it's an art.
And I recall you mentioning that when we were going through this basic stuff. You want to have a conversation, which is hopefully one that you win, presumably.
Yes, I mean, as I keep saying as well, it is the art of defence. So the greatest defence is that you walk away from it.
Right.
And so that is a very valid, you don't have a conversation, you walk away from it. So you can lose that conversation. But it is, again, about trying to meter that conversation to your own ends. And yes, you can lose it.
Scientific.
Well, the people like Agrippa, who was one of the early masters, and say he's an architect, and he put out lots of angles. De Grassi, who's one of my personal favourites, it shows angulations and where you should be. And it is because essentially you're using a piece of metal that is like a lever. And this is not just to rapier, but everything is scientific in that point of view. But in order to get that small space, that accuracy, you have to place that exactly and get the right angulation and get the right speed. Scientific in terms of, because some people think a parry, for example, which is that's just the way you position the sword, but it's not. It's about certainly the placement of the blade, where it is in relation to your body, but it's also that the momentum that you apply to the other person's blade in binding it and taking it back. So and quite often for every reaction there's an equal and opposite reaction. So you are again judging that reaction going in. So it's scientific.
Yeah. You mentioned some of those masters there. Did you say Agrippa? Agrippa. Can you tell us about him?
Not much more than that, really. It's not one of the studies that I have particularly studied, but he was sort of like an early side sword person. And he did go against some of the naturalistic instincts, in a way, of fencing. So, for example, if a blade is coming here, rather than going there, drop the blade and come round the other side. Because then this is what's called gaining the line, in a way. So it goes against your basic instincts. So he was a man who applied himself to, again, taking up this great thing in the sense of the science and the art and applying the science to it. So, I mean, and then there's other ones like Saviolo, who was a soldier, Giacomo de Grassi. He, again, had a military history. He wrote his treaty. He was sort of commissioned to do it, but his lord never seemed to be particularly interested, so it was more or less, I'll write it anyway. And this was a thing, you were looking for patronage at the time. And one of the things that we found slightly going off-piste here,
Yeah.
but the treaties don't contain everything. They're not designed to contain everything.
Right.
Some of them more so than others. If you're writing it for your patron to give an idea of how to fence, do become a little bit more like a handbook. But so many more of them are almost like advertising material.
Oh, right.
You'll get this far and then come and be trained. And
Right.
that's what we say with us as well, because you will not learn everything
Yeah.
unless you have an understanding. You won't learn everything from the treaties by any means.
Right.
You have to go like we did and find out the what and the when from somebody who has knowledge of it. And you can find it through other systems. You can find it through Eastern martial arts systems. They've got a symbiosis with it. But they don't contain everything, and some contain more than others.
Right.
So it's not sort of like, here's your book, there you go, off, go and kill somebody. That's not going to happen.
Right.
You will die.
So there was many reasons why they were written then.
Yes, yeah. Some of them were, as I say, advertising material. Some were, it's the end of my life, I'm going to put everything down.
Right. Similar to Miyamoto Musashi, right? The Japanese, there was a famous Japanese samurai. I think he got to the end of his life and felt like he had to get it all down.
Indeed.
Didn't want to disappear with it. So one thing that's become evident as we've been in contact and learning about this these sword fighting, European sword fighting systems, this is the Scholar Warrior podcast, and you've been talking about this cultivation of, the Italian masters, where they suggest you should be scientific, you should be a swordsman, you should write verse. And it seems to be also in your approach. I saw your grading system, and Brendan also mentioned that one of the qualifications is scholar. So that harmonious development seems to be in your system. What is it particularly you think about the sword or the rapier, which lends itself to this sort of personal development? As opposed to, say, flower arranging or gardening?
Because that's a good question. I think it's the it takes itself into so many other aspects of your life, and because of the timing issue, you've got to get things right at a very important single small moment of time, and you do have to think fast, but the more you train, the faster you think, and time can slow down. Adrenaline does that anyway within you. You get a rush of adrenaline, you can sometimes you can say, I'm just going to be hit now. My body's not going to react to this. I can see that sword coming. I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. Well done. You almost dropped your sword and that, got me. So there is that, and there is the training of the body to be able to accomplish what you will. And it's something personally I can do, and it's an exercise, and I get tired afterwards, but not during, because and I think it's again, it's an appreciation of the art that the people had in the past, and learning, unearthing sort of those secrets, and feeling, in a sense, what you're saying, Rio, we're in the second renaissance of the sword at the moment. So yes, there were all these masters from the Elizabethan period and beyond, and it went certainly sort of like rapier. Went into what sort of classical fencing, which was not like sports fencing. It was much more free, so it wasn't tied to a piece, and there were large crowds came to those, huge crowds, especially in Italy and Spain. And then it sort of died off, and then in this country at least, there were a couple of people, Egerton Castle and Captain Alfred Hutton, who were military men and saw the merits of these old systems in being able to train their men how to use weapons more effectively and better. And they sort of looked into it and started using their own understanding of weapon forms. And they set up a school, and they were there, and they did stuff in front of the Prince of Wales and stuff at the time. But most of his school, unfortunately, were killed off during the First World War.
Right.
And then it sort of died. And then again, when just about, as I say, we were coming online, we sort of rediscovered these things. So it's extremely exciting to get that. And so this is like the second renaissance of the sword.
So, how do you think the sword has benefited yourself, and have you felt there's been a crossover into any other aspects of your life? I mean, as your swordsmanship, improved, developed, did you notice any other benefits, to thinking or physically or anything else like that?
Physically, yes, which is, I suppose, fairly obvious,
Right.
So it's if you're doing a training thing that you're not worried about, so I'll train at home and whatever. Mentally, yes, it became a more disciplined and more confident person as a result of it. And so in my own thinking, yes, a sort of a passion to look into historical texts, look at those, but also in the way it's a sort of taking things more in my stride than I was. Perhaps that's with age as well. But it's fight the battles, fight those that are important, let slip those that don't matter.
Right.
Come back for those that are important. Know how to stop things. Also being, potentially even in the street. It's sort of like I'm not so wound up or whatever. I'm confident about things that might happen around me. And we see that with our students as well. They say they're much more confident in themselves. And that ability just to, I don't have to worry about that. So it can affect not just in interpersonal relationships, but it can affect you in the way that you look at life in general, really. So it's a sort of putting things into perspective and being able to recognise potential pressures and what's worth resisting, what's worth letting go. In that sort of idea, as I said, of contraction and expansion, it's that sort of within yourself as well. Physically, my breathing's a lot better than it was. My asthma is far less troubling. As I said, I did have a heart condition which stopped me potentially training for a bit. But they said it's amazing that you're doing what you're doing.
Right.
Because you're fit and you're not getting. Your heart shouldn't be making you faint. It makes other people faint. You're not. So.
Well, that's quite a big benefit.
Yes, it's quite a good.
Not fainting. Okay, so some kind of practical stuff for people that are listening to to this at home in the car. We don't know where they are. They could be thinking, this sounds pretty interesting. This historical European martial arts sounds interesting, and certainly we know it's growing in popularity very quickly. Quite succinctly, why should someone take it up if they're listening?
Why? Because I think it can potentially change their lives. I think it can. It's a discipline to the body. It's a discipline to the mind. That the groups that are generally around are very welcoming, and it's broader than just the fencing. There's the study aspect as well, but it's not enforced upon you, so it can just help you to put life's pressures, strains into perspective, as I said.
One really nice thing I noticed and you brought to our attention about your class was the circle at the beginning, whereby you said so you form a circle in the beginning, you go through a warm-up, and you said everyone is kind of equal here at this moment. And what's in the circle now is what we're doing. We're here to train, and you can kind of leave what's going on in your life or what's stressful or what work or whatever. You can leave that outside and sort of get a relief and just go in depth into something, which I think...
Well, that is one of the things. You can come away from a stressful day at work and you can be pent up and there's things going on in your head. And you can release them within the cell, but not in an aggressive way. What we do is we form the circle, and what we are doing is we are sharing our knowledge. So you do have to respect knowledge. So there is respect from the students for us and for our knowledge that we're passing on, and there's respect from us to our students because they're giving up their time and they want to learn. And in that moment, yes, you put everything else that is in there and you concentrate on what you're doing at the time. And that is the focus. We will talk, there will be exchanges in between where we're explaining things or we're talking about other things. And then afterwards we do the circle again. We acknowledge each other for what we have basically shared. And then we go back to our lives, hopefully. And I think everybody goes in a much better frame of mind generally than what they entered.
It was a very, very good environment. I was really impressed with the learning environment. Very, very impressive. What would you say to someone who's feeling anxious about going to one of these classes? I mean, even I was quite excited about it. I've been training martial arts for many, many years. I was thinking, we're going to go and throw these... Well, not throw, sorry, this sounds a bit uncivilized. We're going to move these swords around. That's quite exciting. What would you say to someone who's feeling anxious about trying one of these classes out?
Well, what we do, for example, within our cell is we say you can just come along and watch at first if you want. Quite a few people do come along and watch, and then they get sort of, I'd really like to have a go at this. Wait a minute.
Sword.
And they say, and we will pick up a sword. Our people are the whole sort of ethos of us is that we do want to promote this. We're excited about it ourselves. We'd like to pass that excitement on to other people as well. So it's generally welcoming. Come and try, don't be afraid. Just hold a sword. As you say, it can be intimidating, but quite often you pick up one, and for the long sword, quite often you think, well, this is this mighty, but they're actually probably lighter than you would imagine.
That is exactly what happened when we both picked them up. I was expecting it to be this huge, lumbering piece of metal, and it is surprisingly agile.
All swords have to be.
Yeah.
If they're not, then there's a moment of status where you're going to die. So it's all around the balance point. Even a sword, that can be heavy, but it's how it balances and how it moves. And generally they are lighter, and we do have quite a number of women involved in our classes, and they don't find it an issue. One thing I would say it's almost anecdotal, is that I think maybe because of the general sort of sports background that has sort of maybe historically been around, that you will find men come in and they'll have because of their used to sports and throwing and whatever, they'll have a sort of natural aptitude at first that will go like that. And quite often women are a bit more cautious and then quite often afraid, I don't want to hurt anybody.
Right.
But we don't allow you to free fence, as I said, straight away to begin with anyway. We'll practice with it. And their build can be like that, slower, but then it will just take off, and they'll quite often be better than the men at the end. And the reason for that is that some people rely on their natural ability, and then that's not enough, and they haven't listened to the lessons that they've taken on board. Whereas this absorption of the study and the techniques, and that sort of, I'm willing to learn and know exactly how to use this in order to get where I want to be, and then it's just like boom.
Right.
And once you're there, it's great, but the learning never stops.
And I think that's a really good point of note, the variety of practitioners that were there. There was every shape and size. There was very dainty people, there was very powerful guys, there was very young guys. It's just a real mix, and everybody felt comfortable. So I think that's another very important point for someone that's listening. Which some martial arts feel like they're out of reach for certain types of people. You've got to be big and strong for this kind of thing, but this is I think this is more accessible.
But also this is where the science and the art comes in.
Right.
Because as I said, essentially most weapons are levers, and this is a scientific principle. You hit that lever at the right point, and you hardly have to put any effort into it. So it's getting those points, knowing where it is, understand, and you understand your body. This is another advantage. You understand your body a lot more after doing this. There are people come in with disabilities, leg injuries, all sorts of things, and the fence has enabled them to overcome those and find ways through them and improve them as well. So it's very good for balance, for example, and just knowing how, getting an understanding of your body to how it works, into knowing I can avoid, any sort of contact by just moving my body like that, letting all that force flow past me. It's a very...
Well, I'm a Tai Chi guy, and these are exactly Tai Chi principles, so my eyes light up when I hear things like that. Just let it go, just redirect it.
Redirect force.
Yeah, exactly, the force. So, one last question on the practical tips, and then we'll move on to some bonus quick fire questions.
Oh.
Yeah. I can't, maybe I forgot to mention those. What qualities are important for long-term success in this historical European martial arts? Long-term.
Commitment and an open mind. I would say are what is needed. Do not get tied up in your one method. For example, just bringing it back, I realised in looking at some footage of myself that I wasn't really getting back to what is a good neutral guard position. I was too confident in what I was doing. So therefore, I brought myself back and I got hit by a student, or got hit by students. But that's fine. And it's that sort of, that's sort of respect from the student as well, for and realise what you're doing, and that's good, but I feel good that I've hit you. And that ability to just always keep testing yourself, not afraid to keep testing yourself, not afraid to adjust yourself, keeping an open mind to what's around you, I'd say, in the long term. And yes, exactly that, really, openness and commitment.
Okay, so these bonus questions, totally not particularly related to what we've been talking about, just fun, just like 5 minutes. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you?
Okay, well, I'm not weird, I'm an individualistic person. And our group is full of individuals, which is, but on a scale of 1 to 10...
That doesn't sound very weird at all.
No, I don't... Are you ever going to say that yourself weird? Yeah, I used to, used to dress up in all sorts of things and do weird stuff when I was in my youth. But I'd say, yeah, probably I'm at the weirder end, so I'd give myself a 7 or an 8.
7,
yeah.
okay, that's fairly unweird. What would you do in the event of I've been really looking forward to asking you this.
Okay.
What would you do in the event of a zombie apocalypse?
Right, okay, well, I'd get rid of the rapier.
Okay.
Because apparently they can be taken with their heads off, and so what you need is a cutting weapon.
Right, you thought about this.
So, but I would probably, in order to stop them getting at me, I would take up a longsword. And because that keeps them at maximum range. So I would do that. And also I'd ask my entire class to go out there before me. Clear the way.
Sacrifice. What are you not really good at?
What am I not really good at? In the martial art perspective, I suppose you mean.
No, anything you like.
I'm a terrible swimmer.
Okay.
I used to...
You won't be swimming away from the zombies.
No, and anyway, my swords would rust. But it needed about 5 life rings around me when I was trying to learn to swim. And I could anchor boats, so
Okay.
I'm not a good swimmer.
Swimming it is. Favourite quote?
Oh, gosh, that is a tricky one. I suppose I do like some of the Shakespeare ones, like he is the very butcher of a silk button, I suppose. That is because it's that sort of, what the heck is he on about?
Right.
But I know.
Okay. He's the very butcher of a
Silk button.
Okay. favourite movie, documentary, or book that you would recommend?
Well, the Capo Treaty as a book is very good, but it's not the most invigorating of reads. What is a MacBain's account. That is a roister doister. He got blown up by cannon fire and got immersed in oil for 3 months or whatever, and still went back, and he fought his last fight at something like the age of 78.
Wow.
Having campaigned, been kidnapped, whatever, he was a character, and so that is good. And if a film got made out of that, that would be really good. And I suppose if you're talking about films, Princess Bride is good fun, because early on you're going, they're talking about all these treaties, you realise they're talking nothing about these treaties, and The Duelists is a very good film.
Okay. This is a pain. I'll be really intrigued to know the answer to this question. Sorry, this is not on here. The Princess Bride, was the sword fighting good or authentic in your eyes?
It was good.
It was good.
It was good. I mean, these people have trained for ages, and you've got to admire the fact that they actually did train with their other hand as well, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So, yes, and I did meet the choreographer.
Oh, really?
So, he's a marvellous guy. And when you look at the old films, they tended to, you go, what the hell are they doing? Because they're fencing out of distance. They could never have actually hit each other. That was their safety thing. As sort of choreography improved, defence within distance but offline. So the sword, if the camera's there, the sword would go there to that side.
Right.
So it looked like it would have hit or be really close, but actually it's within sync. So that's a very precise art, so you've got to admire that.
Yeah.
But something like...
Right.
I mean, when you find yourself occasionally doing... I don't, of course. But if one sees that happening, you know, that's a little bit swashbuckly there, and it's trying to desperately get yourself out of danger.
Right.
But it's all, you've got to admire it. It's a different sort of technique, but it's good. They've practiced.
Very cool. I'm happy to hear that, because I love that. I love that movie and I love that scene. Who is your inspiration? Who do you find inspiring?
Oh God, this is going to sound so cliched, isn't it? But my students.
Oh, okay, that's nice, isn't it?
Because through teaching, you have got to you look at things from a different way. There's things you can do yourself with your own body dynamic and your own mental way, but you can look at other people and you can say, why aren't you getting that? And then you get a little light bulb in your own mind through having to sort of think around their way, and you can learn things from doing that as well. And those students who are having problems but then overcome it and get it, and just that, well done for persevering, well done for not giving up. So I do find that.
And you are a very patient teacher as well.
Well, thank you.
I can say that. Okay, now, what should people do to find out more about you guys? Where should they go?
We do have our website, which is Sussex Sword Academy, so just Google that. I should know the whole address, but I don't. We also have a Facebook group, so look at that. And on there is all the contact details. It will come either through to me or my brilliant secretary, Cameron, or Lyle, the other instructor, or whatever.
So did you give the website? Do you know, it's Sussex Sword Academy, is it .org?
.org,
Yeah, I think it's .org.
Yes.
It's a great site. It's got the video on there.
And it's very new, very pleased. We had an old website and it's just gone up. This is why when you first contacted me, my email address hadn't quite swapped over for that, so I couldn't respond. But it's back up, and we need updating again. We're going to put more stuff on there. We're going to... I'm not sure if it's up there yet, but I wrote an article for an Italian magazine on the duelling history. So that's going to go on there. There's going to be a members section as well, where we can give sort of tips and references as well, and put up some of our videos of our training sessions. So we've asked permission to do that, so that people will be able to see yourself fencing is a great thing. It's great to be able to fence in front of a mirror, but if you take your mind off to look, you know, you get killed. So it's nice to be able to look back and we can say, this is where you went wrong as well. Oh well.
I highly recommend going, and to anybody that's listening in Sussex area or even around London or wherever, or they could be anywhere actually.
It could be.
They could be anywhere. They could be in America. When they come to the UK, they should come and see you guys. Or if they're in the UK, they should also come and see you guys. Go to this. go and see these guys. Go to the website. Go and check out their class. They're amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers.